Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Wow, I'm like on stage, like the Grammys or something. We are going to get started. Thank you all for your patience. We had just a minor technology issue to work through. Welcome so much. I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Stephen Windmueller here. I got his name as a recommendation from our own Rabbi Einstein, and they'll be spending some time talking, and Rabbi Einstein will be introducing him in a moment and telling you a bit about his background. But I just wanted to get you excited about 2026 being the 50th anniversary for CBT in this community. Super excited. And we have decided to engage in a series of events that celebrate the really important pillars of our congregation. So this is the first of those as we move forward in the coming months. And the first one, we're highlighting our commitment to lifelong learning. And Dr. Windmueller is going to talk to us about what it is to be a Jew in America in the 21st century. And I'm going to turn it over to our two distinguished guests to continue from here.
Thank you, Shelley. So when Shelley approached me some months ago and told me about the idea of celebrating our 50th anniversary year, this looks like such a wonderful way to do it and Tuesday night is really the right time. I mean, we have people in the room now who all those years ago came every Tuesday night because that was one of our regular adult learning nights. And I said, I think it's a great idea. And she asked for a recommendation, and I didn't have to think more than a second before I recommended Dr. Stephen Windmueller. I've known Professor Windmueller for many, many years. He is Professor Emeritus of Jewish Communal Service at the Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, where he had served for many years as a director of the School of Jewish Nonprofit Management and as a dean of the college, holding a PhD from University of Pennsylvania. He's a man who has worked in the Jewish community as well as studied it for many years. I follow him avidly. Whenever I see anything that he's written, I grab onto it. Some of you have seen them because I will reproduce some of them on my Facebook page. Dr. Windmueller writes regularly for E-Philanthropy and for the Times of Israel. And every single thing that I have read of his has been thoughtful and thought-provoking. Tonight's not going to be a real happy night all told, I don't think. I mean, we're happy to be together, but we're living through fraught times. Now that I'm retired, I can be really open. So if you want to know my thoughts about how to live today, just look at my socks. If you can't see it from there, I'll tell you. It says resist. There's a lot that we need to resist, but there's also a lot that we can enjoy and learn from. And so I guess giving us a bit of what they say the joys and the oys of Jewish life, I'm thrilled to present Dr. Stephen Windmueller.
I should take your rabbi with me. He's a great PR supporter. First of all, Mazel Tov on your 50th anniversary.
Obviously somebody running for office.
It's an extraordinary opportunity to look back, but also to look forward, and to fully appreciate that here we are in the first quarter of a new century, and are going to sort of encounter significant transformational moments in this century, some of which are for the first in the history of humankind, and others of which simply remind us of past moments in the context of what folks have struggled with and dealt with over time. What we want to do first tonight is to take a look at some of the data points and then talk openly and for however long you wish.
This one?
No, we haven't.
He'll back it up a little.
I should take the rabbi with me. He's so I am assuming you heard what I had to say. There's no final exam, so if you missed a word or two, it's really okay. So Mark, when you're ready, we can power up the PowerPoint and begin our journey and take a look at some of the both difficult questions, as the rabbi has noted, but also the possibilities of what this moment and this transition may represent. To begin with, as Mark prepares for us to do this presentation, to fully appreciate the fact that American religion itself is going through huge transformations. In a piece that I had written that Rabbi Einstein has read, dealing with really a synopsis of 2026 and what religion in America will look like this year, the National Council of Churches is telling us that 15,000 churches in the United States will close their doors this year. 5,000 closed their doors in 2019, and since then, we've seen this progression of transformation, closures, mergers, and downsizing. But what we've also seen is an extraordinary rebirth in parts of the religious sector that we did not expect. And that is exciting as well. Young Americans, Jewish and non-Jewish, exploring different ways towards spirituality, which actually has become the sort of thematic idea that has dominated and continues to dominate the fabric of where religious life is moving. And so we see a kind of melting together of Sufism, spiritualism, a variety of yoga initiatives, and religion, integrated and aligned together in creating some really fascinating outcomes. Another factor is there are today religious apps. Yes, on your phone you can have a religious app. So if you're interested in a verse from Torah, or you want to study a Talmudic text, or you're concerned about a prayer, you can literally have that literally at your fingertips. And what that has done is made what Ron Wolfson and I have described in a recent article a kind of personalized religious experience where the individual defines, creates, and structures his or her religious journeys. Another reality to all of what is unfolding at the moment are the really interesting aspects to the arrival of new forms of Jewish religious encounter. Some of this is taking place online. Others of this model are reflected in the growth of what we call now the national synagogues. Central Synagogue in New York, Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, one Reform, one Conservative, Temple Israel of Detroit, a Reform congregation, IKAR in Los Angeles, a non-denominational sort of bottom-up, emergent form of religious expression, all creating huge online learning and worship opportunities. Central Synagogue reported to us that in the high holidays of 2023, so 2 years ago, they had 500,000 hits, meaning on Yom Kippur, from across the globe, Jewish and non-Jewish. Individuals joined Central Synagogue's worship services at some point on this, the most holiest day on our calendar. What is extraordinary about this is that similar data points were given to us by some of these other congregations, and what we are seeing is a huge hybrid today of both in-person, online, and now this national phenomenon of religious expression and activism, telling us that far from being dead or marginalized, religion is simply taking on different forms and expressions and context. Maybe we can check with Mark if he can come in. He seems to be in the back room. This is called a filler. So I'm just trying to give you some context to what hopefully we can study together in more in-depth ways. I'm also interested in the fact that what we have seen in the emergence of a religious life in this country is a major discussion about the religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and not the nuns of the Catholic Church. The nuns who are saying to us, none of the above. And over 30% of Americans today describe themselves as part of that construct, the nuns. And what does that really mean? And how is that being framed in the context of religious life or non-religious life? And what replaces it in the formula of how people live their lives, draw their moral structures and content? This becomes one of the great issues in the 21st century because Gen Zs are going to be the sort of focal point of so much about what is and will be happening to American religion. Ages 18 to 39, they are going to be central figures in much of the storyline of what we are looking at moving forward. And certainly, if we leave aside just the religious, structural, denominational piece and talk about the larger role of religion in society, social justice, of community engagement, of interreligious behaviors and expectations, we continue to see this as a kind of major sort of new marketplace in a sense because of the politics in which we find ourselves and the divisions in our society in which we know. And more directly in terms of the Jewish community, the biggest single questions will be, how will we respond to, deal with, and live with, or live in the context of anti-Semitism? And how do we deal with the issues of Israel to our children, our grandchildren? And how do we deal with Israel in our own lives in terms of the questions about Israel's future, its Zionist model, and the particulars of this last several years, and how it has divided us and challenged us and brought us to this moment in time. So let's begin a more formal direction through how we proceed. There are now a number of books, and you might see this better, Rabbi,
Sure.
from down below. There's no exam for you either.
Yeah, right.
Two rabbis, Joshua Stanton and Benjamin Spratt, have written an extraordinarily interesting book called Awakenings, which is talking about a lot of the thematic issues I've just sort of introduced here. And what they're saying to us, this is an age of fracture and fragmentism and fragmentation, and Americans, and more particularly American Jews, crave new ideas and are dealing with the threads of coherence. And the new Jewish awakening before us, in their minds, could actually generate well beyond the Jewish community a kind of awakening that will take us into how we use technology, how we understand the extraordinary resources of the Jewish past to bring it forward for a Jewish future. I mean, we know that in the human condition, change is an ongoing phenomenon. It's just the pace of change in our lives has been strikingly dynamic and transformational. In much of it is about how it has moved us from predictability to ambiguity, to an uncertainty, because we don't know the outcomes. We don't know what AI's full potential will be, or how it will impact us, or the lives of our kids, or the lives of the institutions we care about. But it has also helped us to redefine that we, the individual, has become, in a sense, very much a kind of super definer of the human condition. And our role has radically changed in determining where we go and what we do. We have become the sovereign self. And with it has come self-empowerment in the sense of how people think about their politics, their religion, their values, and their culture. And all of that has been part of this rapid and realistic set of changes. But it has also brought crisis to us, and the crisis of democracy is one of them. And it is bringing about the fourth industrial revolution for us as well in terms of the new technologies, the new ways by which we will craft business and understand economics and deal in a world that is fundamentally shifting. But in so many ways, we have been living with 19th century ideologies and 20th century institutions, and yet we are 21st century people. And all of that coming together is creating this really new moment in time. Okay, move. Technology is not my thing. No bigger change that we are seeing are certainly generational. In terms of what I described earlier, Gen Zs as being distinctively different in terms of their relationship to institutions, to religion, to community and culture. And so we're watching this with great anticipation in terms of how they will either rediscover the synagogue, rediscover Judaism in whatever ways they will craft, or whether they will in part walk away from much of this to invent or create or rethink their place in history. The rise of individualism and the power of the individual, which we described earlier, and the particulars of the sovereign self as important. Oops, going backwards, I'm not allowed to do that. Don't go backwards. Never in the 21st century do we go backwards. Okay, there we go. 1, 2, 3. We all once remembered that our parents, grandparents had a kind of loyalty about institutions. They belonged to a particular synagogue. Their children belonged to that synagogue. That pattern of connective engagement with institutions is changing. The fact that we may belong to a particular place and a particular sort of point of importance to us does not ensure or guarantee that our kids or grandkids will hold those same loyalties. We are living at the end of civility and the loss of trust. Now, this is a universal phenomenon. It has a religious overtone to it because the loss of trust is the loss of trust in leaders, in institutions, and institutions of religion included, but also of business and government, of education and culture. And so as a result, what we are seeing is a transformational moment about how we talk to one another, or can we even talk with them, and how we understand the sense of something that has bound us together, of trust, which is all but broken. We're in a new communications revolution, as we all know, and the social media piece to that of the various platforms that we have access to, and the rise of the influencers, those people that today are defining what you should believe and what you should read and what you should, in a sense, be prepared for. Because what has shifted is that the elites of our society, which were once the corporate heads, the presidents of major institutions, the clergy of America, that those key players and instruments of authority have given way to the social media influencer and to the power from the bottom up rather than from a kind of top-down framework. And what we have also seen is the rise, as we've talked about earlier, of the virtual Jewish experience, the online possibilities, and the privatized kinds of Jewish experiences of having a religious app, as an example. I think in this century, we need to remind ourselves of what has already taken place. And each of these factors is creating, in its own regard, multiple sort of ripple points in our lives. The 2008 economic recession, followed by the 2021 pandemic, would see huge shifts in institutions, and which we see in the business world, but we are also seeing in the religious world. And I referenced some of the data points about churches earlier, and about synagogues as well. The downsizing, the closures, and mergers that are happening in liberal religious institutions across the United States, including our own Jewish community. We are seeing an out-migration, and we're seeing it in Southern California, in the Bay Area, in metropolitan New York, and parts of greater Chicago. The out-migration is that younger families and even older families are leaving long-held sort of locus points in their lives, their rootedness in a large metropolitan area, moving to where their kids are going, shifting to other parts of the country where they retire for tax benefits or for other purposes. And the shifts are significant because the fastest growing parts of the United States today are Idaho and Nevada and Austin, Texas, and a host of other places that have become the new sort of center points for many families and many households who have made those choices to out-migrate, to leave where they were. And much of this comes at the time of the pandemic because work itself changed and the nature of work has changed, where people can work from home or work from anywhere, where Zoom and conference calls and a host of other opportunities allow them to really live a very different lifestyle, which is fundamentally shifting all of and much of the kinds of changes we're seeing. And we are also seeing the disappearance of the American middle class. It is growing smaller, and the divisions in our society between the wealth of one class and the poverty and lack of resources of a lower class has really created and is creating a huge transformation economically in the American economy. And finally, we are living with cultural wars. The wars that we are fighting around the Civil War itself and how we celebrate it, understand it, study it, and how we interpret, for example, what it all may have represented. But that's but one example of these cultural wars happening. It's happening around DEI and the whole notions of equity, inclusion. It's involving itself in a host of issues around Israel and how Americans understand Israel or the changing perceptions and beliefs about Israel. So, as I mentioned at the outset, we talked about the religious nuns and the reality of their presence. But we are also witnessing the decline of denominations. Protestant America is fundamentally going through a huge shift as the downsizing of mainline Protestant movements is taking place. And that is reflected as well in the conservative and reform movements in our country and the Reconstructionist movement here as well. But we are seeing the growth of these alternative spiritual and religious expressions, which I introduced in our conversation at the outset. But undergirding all of this are the deeper divides that we are not talking to each other and that we have found fewer points of connection that has changed the ways in which congregations engage with one another, the ways by which communities construct and build with one another, and even within households where we have disagreements with others who live with us. What we see happening in religious life in America is that we have the seeker, the dweller, the switcher, and the religious nuns. The dwellers are us, the second category here. We are members. You belong here, I belong to a synagogue in Los Angeles. We have a sense of community, of continuity, and even our continuity is being shaken at this moment. But there are those out there who are seekers, and their numbers are significant, because we now estimate that well over 60% of American Jews have no affiliation, and how and where do they find and will they find a place to connect? Now, there has been, since October 7th, 2023, what we call the surge. The surge is that since the Gaza conflict and since the rise of overt anti-Semitism here, 31% of American Jews who were not affiliated and not participants have somehow come home. Now, it takes various forms. It may be enrolling a kid in a day school. It may be contributing monies to a federated campaign. It may be joining a synagogue. It may take the form of becoming a donor to a particular national Jewish cause. But the fact is that there has been a dramatic and pronounced movement of Jews back into community since the 7th of October. Whether we will sustain them and maintain that sort of new sense of engagement, that will be the test on all of us and all of our institutions. The switchers are those that are still looking for their specific homes. They belong to one or another institution and have moved or are moving now to some other institution. And we've always had switchers. The numbers of them have increased only because the choices for them are more available than ever. And as we've chatted about the nuns as the fourth phenomenon here. American Judaism itself, as we know, will celebrate our 250th anniversary with the founding of the United States. Yet Jews were here from 1654 on, and yet we are so much a part of the American story that when the Eastern European waves of immigration came between 1880 and 1920, we literally created a community. Yes, there were synagogues here, and yes, there were Jews here. There were 50,000 Jews here at the time of the Civil War, 2,000 Jews here during the period of the Revolutionary War. And by the way, the very first soldier to be killed in the defense of the United States in the Revolutionary War was a Jewish soldier from South Carolina. So we are part of the American story, and the 1880s is particularly significant because what was happening in America at that time was the rise of the third wave of American religious identity or awakening. So the Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Theological Seminary, the Yeshiva University of America would be created in the period of the post-Civil War period, precisely because Americans were returning to religion in a period of peace in the country, recreating the American story after the Civil War, and we would see religious denominationalism born in this post-Civil War era. The second thing we would see is progressivism. We needed to solve and deal with major issues, welcoming the stranger, of settling people into their new homes as those coming to these shores. The immigrant was being received. And in the process of that reception, the Jewish community joining with Catholic Charities, the United Way, and in our case, the Jewish Federation system would be born. The first federations were Cincinnati and Boston in the 1890s. And ultimately, all of the major American communities would create federated structures that would serve people at whatever needs they may have, by employing the use of these great institutions of Jewish family and children's services, of JCCs, of Jewish free loan societies, and of a host of other infrastructures. And the third theme of that period was advocacy. Americans of all types began to advocate, whether it was for ties that they had with countries abroad, or whether it was about the issues of African Americans living in this country and the role and long-term question of their civil and human rights, which ultimately would take us well into the 20th century to even begin to formally address. But advocacy, progressivism, and religious awakening were the drama that led to the legacy age of American life and the Jewish experience. But 1985 comes along and a second revolution takes place. And it's silently happening, and we don't even monitor or understand it. We have created, between 1985 and 2005, 600 new Jewish organizations that came on the scene. And you know them, and you may have even been supportive of them and remain active with them. I'll just cite 3 or 4 that were born just in the year 1985. The American Jewish World Service, Mazon, the Jewish Response to Hunger, both created in 1985. The Jewish Republican Coalition, created in 1985. And J Street, and then hosts of other organizations would come into play that today deal with Israel and Jewish culture, with Jewish study, with a whole host of advocacy concerns. And they range in their politics and in their practices to represent usually specific responses, single issue responses: hunger, advocacy for a particular political party, advocacy for a particular issue in Israel, advocacy associated with and being active on behalf of PJ Library. How do we help kids learn about being Jewish? PJ Library is created as part of this. Birthright Israel is created as part of this. You know these groups, and you may have readily been supportive of many of them. 600 of them are created in this extraordinary moment to meet specific needs in a community that is radically and rapidly changing. So there are now writers telling us in this decade that maybe this is the end of the Jewish century in America. Yes, the great years of the American Jewish experience were the post-Second World War years. We built and created a Jewish state. We brought Soviet Jews to freedom. We helped America deal with its civil rights question. And internally, what we did with our own communities is we moved to suburbs, and we moved to new counties, and we built synagogues in the 60s, in the 50s, and in the 70s. This is but one extraordinary example of that story. Here in Orange County, in the evolution and development of this sort of post-Second World War expression, we have arrived in America and are part of the American story of Protestant, Catholic, and Jew in a post-Second World War environment, and we created a communal system that was extraordinary. American Jews today, on the whole, are providing extraordinary resources, financial and otherwise, not only to Jewish causes, but to an array of civic and community and cultural causes across the board. And then comes October 7th. And so for many, the question has come, is this the moment that has ended this extraordinary love affair that we've had with the American experience? And what is its effect on our institutions, on our lives, on our sense of our security and safety in this country? And that will be the profound question over these next number of years, how we sort of manage moving forward. So I think part of all of this is about living with chaos, and yes, living with and understanding the managing of great amount of change. And how we deal with that is itself an art and a practice that we need to develop. and dealing with the challenges of the systems that we have created, and now those systems are being challenged and are facing huge threats. And embracing experimentation and innovation, because that will be the story for the next 5 to 10 years for sure of the American Jewish scene. Whether we have the courage, the willpower, the resources to go through this period of experimenting and dealing with innovation in ways that we have yet to even imagine. And artificial intelligence and its implications, as we've suggested. And certainly managing what we are facing in terms of hate and how we respond to it and figure out a way to turn around some of these negative outcomes and in that sense also manage our security in a way that is responsible. We're also about the idea of rebuilding community, whatever that may mean to our kids and grandkids, but it's going to be the essential question. Because Jews have always lived in community. Now, the community could be the synagogue, but it also could be something else. And what we will be experimenting with is to see what that idea of community will look like moving forward. And also how we address Israel and our relationship to Israel, how we understand Zionism and our relationship to it, and how our children relate to us and to these issues, and helping them figure out what kind of Jewish state and what kind of Zionism will best represent and best express their connection or reconnection to what this experiment in state building has been about. So that's the storyline for all that I see happening. And it's broad and diverse and it's uncomfortable, but it gives us an opportunity to really redraw who we are and how we sort of fit into the American landscape. Thank you very much.
Are we live? Hello. Yes. I imagine that there may be some questions, so I'll be happy to call on people and have you address your questions to Dr. Windmueller, and I'm sure he will respond. So let's, well, you threatened. Do you have something? Okay, give you a moment to organize it. I know. Okay, good. When I say threatened, that was a joke. We talked the other night, and Alexa said, I think I'm going to have some things that I want to ask Dr. Windmueller. So, good. Anybody else? Yes, Kathy.
I think there were so many ideas in your talk that really resonated. Our son and family live in Omaha, Nebraska, and their temple is 150 years old. So all those things that you talked about are real. And one time our son said, there's so many things floating here now, but one time he said he felt that one of the futures of Judaism and religion was not the buildings. How the buildings have been, like you said, our loyalty, our anchor, but that is changing with the age groups that you spoke of. So, comment? No questions.
So what we are seeing are some significant models of alternative communities. I mentioned ICAR in Los Angeles earlier. So there are multiple models similar to ICAR in Seattle, and Chicago, and Boston, Washington. Sixth and I in Washington is a really interesting, it's a kind of combination of a JCC model and a alternative synagogue model. In New York, we see Romamu and other such models. We've seen in New York, for example, in one of the historic synagogues, Bnai Jeshurun, really a rethinking of the role of the synagogue, taking a synagogue that was dying on the Upper West Side and turning it into something really extraordinary in terms of its music and its culture and ways in which young American and visiting Jews could find a kind of refresher Jewish experience. So we're seeing that, and then we're seeing a young man that I met yesterday. He was in the technology world, but he's creating a platform. So I looked at his platform, and it's going to be a platform that allows a non-affiliated Jew to sort of find his or her spot. Because the platform says, this is who we are, meaning the American Jewish community. This is what we offer. And these are the varieties of ways that you can participate. And if you're interested, here's the access. Either it is the website of a particular institution or a phone number or a combination of videos that you can sort of look into and see what these folks are doing. And this platform will be designed to sort of help the under-affiliated, younger American Jews sort of discover there's a lot out there. The question is, where do I belong? What might fit my needs? The Brandeis University study of 38 American Jewish communities, population studies, Omaha being one of them, and Los Angeles being another, discovered something very interesting about younger American Jews. We say, well, they're not interested in Judaism. They don't belong. Yes, they don't belong, but they are very interested. They're foodies. They're cultural Jewish foodies. Jewish food is big in their world. They are artists. They are interested in the cultural artifacts, movies, and literature, and poetry, and drama. And they are curious about history. So they are outperforming us in many ways, not religiously. They're not necessarily going to Chabad or to a Reform synagogue or to any other institutional place, but they're figuring out ways to create their own responses to all of this. So the studies have uncovered that there are groups of young Jews getting together on Friday night, and they take these things, which we call cell phones, and they silence them for 24 hours. We thought, well, maybe that's what an Orthodox Jew does, or maybe some of us do. But that's what they're doing without necessarily the ritual of Shabbat. But they're creating something that's distinctive for 24 hours with their kids and their friends, because their parents may be living across the country. And so they're building their own sort of counter communities or alternative gathering points. So in that sense, there's a lot happening. It's just not systematized, organized, and framed by the ways we would have sort of measured and judged and experienced Judaism. I think in the back we have a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I came here because I wanted to hear, what you were saying, but this has always bothered me, and I've never understood it. I've talked to the rabbi about this in the past, and we were born shortly after World War II, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was never proud to be Jewish until the 67-day war. And then I could walk around saying that I'm Jewish. And the average Jewish kid was proud to be Jewish after that. And people never saw Israel as being a bully at that time. But they kicked butt. And they won everything they wanted to do. Yet October 7th now, to me, is a parallel. They were attacked, but now they're looked at as a bully. And I've really never understood why the overt. Now, there was so much anti-Semitism when I was growing up in Los Angeles, but now the overt anti-Semitism is directed to the Jewish people as well as Israel. And maybe you can help me clarify that.
So over the past 10 years, the ADL was sharing with us that their data points where anti-Semitism was roughly 12% of the American population, in the year, let's say, 1990. So in the years 2014, 2015, they began to see an uptake, a significant uptake. Part of that was already generated by some data points that they were looking at in the years of the Obama White House and the Obama experience, because there were 1,000 new hate organizations created during the time of President Obama's terms, his 2 terms as president. These were mostly far-right groups that were mostly focused on anti-black, anti-immigrant, but Jews were always seen as the bottom line because Jews were seen as the trigger, as the sort of core organizers behind all of these groups. From 2015 to 2025, those numbers have jumped. As you saw, the ADL study last year of incidents of anti-Semitism, harassment, and other forms of anti-Jewish expression jumped 387%. There were over 9,000 incidents of attacks on Jews. And today, we estimate that over 20% of Americans today would be classified as holding anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish views. And you can look at the ADL data to sort of see how they come up with who is an anti-Semite, what do they believe, and how do they register on that sort of chart of becoming or identified as being anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. Now, Israel is a trigger, but it is not the only trigger. We believe that the economy is a factor. We believe the high profile of Jews in American society is a factor. We think that there's a lot of anger and distrust, which we cited in the PowerPoint, that has triggered all kinds of conspiratorial theories, which Jews are seeing. So what happened in Charlottesville in 2017, in Charlottesville, if you recall, the right in that setting used the term, Jews will not replace us. Now, replacement theory is a big thing in the far right, and it's seen today in the issue of JQ, the Jewish question, which is the far right's way of talking about Jews. On the far left, we have the interesting phenomena of the postmodernists, the whole arena of issues about critical race theory, about wokeness, about any number of issues where the far left is accusing Jews of being colonialists, apartheidists, Zionists, etc. So we are getting it for the first time in our history in both right and left. For the right, the notion is Jews are seeking to become white people by taking white people's jobs, the jobs of the Anglo-Saxons in the White House, as an example. And on the left, the Jews have already become white because we are like the rest of the whites. We are racists, and we are all of these other charges. And we have displaced the brown people in Palestine and elsewhere. So that has created this new conversation about where anti-Semitism fits. 147 campuses were attacked last year, in 2024, during that spring period in which the attacks at Columbia and across the country occurred. And Jewish students were on both sides of this issue because we had young Jews who were pro-Palestinian, and we have certainly many young Jews who are trying to defend and articulate the case for Israel. So that is why I talked about this war and in the context of generational conflict. So it is not just an external challenge to us, which is major, but it's the internal one of Jews, young Jews in particular, who are really disenchanted and disconnected and feeling, in a sense, isolated and angry about what they were taught or not taught about Zionism, about Israel, and how, in a sense, we can reclaim them and bring them back into some discourse about the Jewish story. So this is a very difficult moment because we are in a sense pilloried both within and from without. And you would say, well, how did this all happen? I think it is triggered by a number of factors. The Jewish community made some probably problematic decisions in 2020, roughly 2020, when we downsized our investment in community relations work. A number of communities closed their doors on some of the work they were doing in intergroup and interreligious relationships. And we weren't on the trigger watching what was happening to textbooks. And we were not on the trigger watching what was happening with monies coming from outside of the United States to fund chairs of study at American universities, whether it was Middle East studies, gender studies, or other fields. We just simply did not pay careful attention. So we were asleep, as much of this was simply being evolving and developing as a challenge and now a real threat to the Jewish community. So we are working from a kind of rear action response. And then one last commentary on this. As of the last year, we estimate there are 160 American Jewish organizations that claim to be fighting anti-Semitism. That's fine. They're raising tons of money. That's great. Are they talking to each other? No. Are they creating a collaborative plan for how to respond? No. Is there any way or anyone who's trying to, in a sense, develop a strategy of what needs to happen and how it ought to be evolving or developing? No. So the real challenge, and that very few people are writing about, is that we have raised this extraordinary amount of resources, have all of these institutional players, and have yet to figure out what really is the battle plan moving forward.
Thank you. Can I heard?
This gentleman is 84, or will be.
Will be. Close anyway.
Know it well.
Now, and it was not until probably 56 or 57 that I realized that Israel was actually a country that had formed during my life. I mean, I assumed it had been there forever. And one of the things that, you know, my experience in America has been that you know, we're a country of tough guys, ethical people, people who don't put up with oppression of the minorities. But my thought has been that I'm out of touch with the generation that my kids, my grandkids, and my great-grandchild, one of them, belong to now, and what we can do. We're seeing essentially in this country in the last year, 2 years, the rise of Nazism. And you know, we put that down once, and I am wondering, really wondering, what in the devil we should do about it. Your thoughts?
Shelley, that's another whole conversation for another night, but happy to come back and we can deal with it. I mean, it's simply too complicated and challenging and divisive to sort of deal with, you know, standing on one foot kind of thing. I mean, the best I can say is that American Jews themselves have divided on this question. And I'm trained as a political scientist, and my first love is to study the political scene. And the data on the Jewish vote has changed, and we need to come to grips with the fact that over 34% of Jews have supported Donald Trump in this last campaign. And those numbers have grown substantially from 2016 forward. And that has created itself this difficulty of saying the Jewish community ought to be doing X or Y because we are communities of politics and of Jewish interests. And so it's a far more complicated and difficult journey for us on maybe than any other topic. But I promise you I'll be happy to go deeper into that with others if you're interested in the future.
Okay. So being involved in synagogue leadership, I was listening particularly to you talk about the nuns and the seekers, and we being the dwellers. And I still very much believe in the synagogue, the institution of synagogue life, and I want to encourage that. But given that people have so many ways of engaging in Jewish content, like you said, I know members of this congregation who watch in New York. They watch services take place in New York, or they get their content online, or they may attend an event or so. By and large, a lot of the programming that we do here, our services and things, are available to the community. You don't have to join in order to come and connect. And like tonight, this is free to our members, but also anybody else who would have wanted to attend. So as we look now to our merger and to creating something new and exciting and dynamic and hopefully, brings people to us, we have to see what we can do to convert people from just casual observers of our programming to wanting to support our institution so that it remains for future people. And I know, religious school is one of those drivers that brings people in and requires them to be members. But I'm just wondering, and I don't expect you to answer fully, but maybe just touch on it, what we can do in our planning and our thought process, now that there are so many options for people out there, how we can convert them to affiliation.
So we have some really fascinating studies about why people don't join and why they do. So let's take a look at some of the data of that. First, a lot of folks tell us it's all about distance and travel. I live too far from synagogue X or Y. So the issue of access is on people's minds. The second data point is that people said there's nothing interesting to me that's happening there. So they don't see it as their place, and they're not part of the solution, but they are observing that there are programs that really don't excite them or challenge them or interest them. And so that's the second point from some of the research. The third is, and this comes from a colleague of mine at the Jewish Theological Seminary, Jack Wertheimer, professor of history. And Jack did a study of synagogues, and he asked folks, so why don't you tend to show up? And they said, I don't show up. 37% said they did not show up because suppose the rabbi calls on them and they don't do and know the Hebrew language well enough, they don't know the prayers, they don't know the formula or traditions of the synagogue to know when they should stand or sit, what they should wear or not wear. So they are intimidated, and therefore they sort of stay away because the level of intimidation is their fear. I don't want to be embarrassed when the rabbi asks me to recite the Kiddush or to read the blessings before or after Torah or whatever. And another factor is the cost. A lot of folks are saying, wow, to be Jewish is expensive. Right? To join a synagogue, to go to Israel, to give to charities related to the Jewish cause or community, to have a kosher home, to send kids to day schools. So the Jewish enterprise is an expensive one, and some families are saying, we simply aren't in a position to do that. So these factors, among others, I mean, there's an interesting study about folks who want to walk into a place and they don't see their generation, or they don't see people like them, whether that might mean LGBTQ, it might mean younger folks, it might mean Jews by choice, it might mean any number of things, but the sense of feeling that they're in a place where others are like them in terms of their Jewish journeys.
I have one question. It's from the news yesterday. Celebrating, I believe, 25 years, the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles, which is the conservative seminary that is owned, shall we say, by the American Jewish University. The president of the American Jewish University announced that they have, shall we say, given a wonderful promotion to Rabbi Brad Artson, who is the distinguished dean of that school, and given him a nice position, not in the rabbinical school. There will be big changes, possibly disaffiliating with the conservative movement. What are your thoughts on that?
I was quoted in that article, if you noticed. We don't have to go over what the reporter asked me, but this is the phenomenon on the other end, training of our rabbis. We have far fewer folks entering the American academies of Jewish studies to become rabbis than we've had in the past. That means for reform, reconstructionism, conservative, and it also means for some of the independent, non-denominational seminaries. So fewer students, but there are also fewer pulpits. But the American rabbinate itself is radically changing. And Rabbi Einstein will know this far better than I, but a significant number of his colleagues who are still in the active rabbinate are not congregational rabbis, but are doing all kinds of other extraordinary things in Jewish life and beyond Jewish life. So it has rapidly created this challenge of, do we need all these seminaries? What kind of seminaries do we need? And what ought to be the curriculum in terms of training rabbis besides the core elements of certainly being knowledgeable of and the ability to interpret and teach about the Jewish tradition, our texts, the Hebrew language, and Jewish history. But all of that is part of this moment of radical change. And what will happen to the American Jewish seminaries is still an open-ended question. And what Jay Sanderson is saying in this article is that they are considering to be a more entrepreneurial agency or institution, in the sense that they will train rabbis who could do and be part of different forms of Jewish practice, be it conservative or reform, or for that matter, potentially even modern Orthodox. But this is really part of that transformational moment. The one question I haven't heard tonight is about Chabad. Every time I have presented on this topic, somebody wants to talk about Chabad. Yes, they are very successful. And yes, they are the largest and fastest growing sort of expression of Jewish life today in the world. But we need to also understand realistically, the nature of that model. And in 2012, one article that I have written that has been read most vigorously than anything else I've ever written was the 10 reasons to understand and unpack Chabad. So I will send it to Shelley and to you, Rabbi, and you can distribute it if you so wish, because it's an interesting insight into both the complexities, the problems, but also some of the learning outcomes we can take away from the Chabad experience in this country.
Dr. Windmueller, you mentioned that one of the reasons the membership in synagogues and other institutions seems to be dwindling is the lack of loyalty, or the sense of loyalty that our parents and grandparents maintained, and that's not happening as much with the younger generation. What about philanthropy? Do we have major Jewish philanthropists like we used to years ago that supported these agencies and organizations?
Shelley, that's another great. scolding you. I'm just saying this is a fascinating question because I'm just now doing a study on Jewish philanthropy, which I'm going to be presenting to the Federation field because it's really the bread and butter question. So the interesting thing about American Jewish philanthropy is that it has just taken off. It is a phenomenon unto itself. There are today literally thousands of Jewish family foundations that have been created. Now, you didn't ask about 1985. Why did I start in 1985 up there when I talked about the second wave of Jewish life in America? It's because of those foundations. Jim Joseph, Schusterman, Bronfman, Mandel, and then you go on by the hundreds. And they vary in capacity to really make an impact. And they are the changing story of American philanthropy. Yes, historically the federated system of giving through federations was the dominant power base of American Jewish giving. That's changed. Today this philanthropic world is much more diffuse with all of these family foundations. But 90% of those dollars, and there are millions of those dollars, are going to symphonies and to hospitals and to universities and to other great causes. But only 10% of those dollars are directed at or to or for the Jewish communal system, our schools, our synagogues, and any of the other institutions. So that's certainly the overarching issue. But we can go much deeper at some point if you so wish. Thank you.
So is the trends for intermarriage and birth rate changing and becoming more of a problem, less of a problem, or not a problem?
So from 2010 to 2020, demographers told us that about seven out of every 10 marriages in the American Jewish scene were between a Jew and a non-Jewish person. Whether that has changed over the last 5 or 6 years, we don't have any, I have not seen any new data. I don't know. But what we do have is this sort of 10-year study, and that's telling us, where we were in 1970s and where we are 50 years later is a very different place in terms of the arrival of Jews by choice, or the possibilities of turning these families into welcoming them into our communities. What we also know is that if one or more of these families make choices about where they go religiously, they are predominantly going Jewish, which is a good sign. But we don't yet know the full impact of that on our community, but it's certainly going to change our community and change the nature of our congregational world as well.
Well, the word loyalty that was used before, that's probably affected there, I would think.
Thank you. We have a question over here.
Oh, thank you. When you were speaking about philanthropy, the thought that sprang in my mind was the elimination of the middle class and the country becoming more stratified, and a lot of the giving perhaps is directed at ways that are self-aggrandizing and
Making the Jew look good.
people concerned with performative wealth and spending money. And perhaps I'm old-fashioned, but it seems like what we need is to reverse the shrinking of the middle class, and that calls for a progressive politics. So it seems to me this is an ideal time for the rise of progressivism on the left. But perhaps I'm old-fashioned about that. Maybe I'm missing something.
Well, there are lots of formulas out there as to how we sort of return the economy to a broader base of consumers and funders and builders, if you wish. So yeah, and progressive politics and progressive ideas is certainly one of those elements in that conversation.
So my question might not be your forte. You might not be able to answer it, but I spend a lot of time on progressive podcasts and listening to them, watching them, and also being engaged in the community within there. And the rise on the left is very significant of anti-Semitism. Is Israel bad across the board? Israel does not have the right to exist. Israel, the latest one I saw was that Zionism and white supremacy go hand in hand together. How would you, I mean, I know we're not supposed to feed the trolls, but there's also like, you know, reporting misinformation. You can do that. You can report that it's misinformation. How would you go about, bringing truth to these blatant lies without feeding the trolls, without putting myself out there for my own attacks onto myself? Would you say to engage, or would you say just report it as misinformation, or what would you recommend?
So among the new organizations are a number of them who are just studying and monitoring those sites that you're experiencing and looking at. And with it, they are trying to respond by providing access to information that's not being offered, pointing out errors historically or otherwise that may be inaccurate about the assumptions being made. So, you know, there are efforts out there. But as I said about the entire fight over anti-Semitism, there's no management of this. So it's hit and miss. And it's whether or not someone is attuned to the particular sites that, you know, maybe you or others are monitoring and trying to respond to. So it's part of this a larger problem that the community has not yet come to grips with a more sophisticated and organized effort at tackling these issues one by one. And part of it will begin in the classrooms, in schools. It's not going to be, unfortunately, we probably have lost part of a generation. We just have to acknowledge that we're graduating folks out of our universities who are coming away with such unfortunate misunderstandings and incorrect information about the history of Jews and Judaism, of Israel, of Zionism, of the Middle East. And we're not going to be able to correct that overnight. And we're going to have to figure out ways in which we intervene in using American social media in the long term. But the battle is now to make sure that this is caught, and the focal point is back to schools and institutions where we can hold institutions accountable for what they're teaching or not teaching, or the balance in what they're offering. We may not be able to convince a university to say that you cannot teach about the case for Palestinians. Of course, you're going to lose that. You're going to have to figure out a way, however, to tell the Zionist/Jewish story as part of that conversation. You should share with, and I don't know if the American Jewish Committee has an office in Orange County.
Unfortunately, they're closed. We have an ADL.
Yes. So Peter Lowy. Peter Lowy is the regional director. Peter Lowy.
Peter Levy.
Peter Levy.
Right.
So Rabbi Levy, you should talk to him about what you are listening and observing and seek his advice. I mean, he's a professional.
Yeah, we'll talk more. I'm on the ADL board, so we can talk more about it.
So I would start with your local ADL office as the first step. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also share interest in the changing demographics and cultural forms of American religion. I've read some pieces recently that have said that among Gen Z men in particular, there seems to be outside the Jewish world, a strong movement into really robust, heavily masculine forms of Greek Orthodoxy and traditional Roman Catholicism, and not as much evangelicalism, but a little bit as well. I'm wondering if there is a corollary among young Gen Z Jewish men, and if so, what that would be.
Yeah. I've been reading some of that too. That there's a distinction between young white males and females in terms of this religious journey. Yeah. As for younger Jews, this is more supposition, but we will have data, but we just don't have it yet. We're not quite as, we're a small community. So we don't produce a lot of data all the time. But my sense is that one of the places some of that's being expressed or experienced is Chabad, and some of the Orthodox institutions in American Jewish life. We're seeing some of that spillover. So yeah, I think there's something there, but we just don't know what it all means yet and how sustainable it is.
Thank you. How concerned should we be about the growing anti-Semitism? I mean, the numbers sound very scary. And I follow the ADL. I think they're well positioned to address issues and be on top of these concerns. Are we following a pattern of Germany in the 30s? And is it only happening because there's a trend of politics to the right in Europe and in the US? Will this change with an administration change in the US? And what can we do? Simple question, right?
Wow.
And how do we get to world peace?
Let's deal with the last one first. That's a little beyond my grade, but I can just best say the following. There's a historian by the name of Simon Montefiore, whose most recent historical work is suggesting to us as Jews that we have misunderstood history. And what we misunderstood was that the period after the Second World War, which we thought was sort of the change of times, we were going to be forever sort of moving into a period of human relationships and kumbaya, and the rise of women, the roles of minorities, the opportunities for all kinds of new ventures for peace. And what he's saying is that we had a window there, but that window is closing, and that we're reverting to what he says is the nature of history. And he views the nature of history to be conflict, wars, racial hatred, anti-Semitism, and that is the experience that our great-grandparents and others have had. And we should understand that we lived in a blessed period in history, and that period is going away from us. And we are reverting to what Europe and the so-called Western world had understood as the sort of commonalities of human existence, which was nations fight nations, and there's a ugliness to a lot of the behaviors of humanity. Now, if we believe that, then what we have to do is to come to grips with what that means for our, mostly for our kids, because we have sort of lived this charmed life, and they're going to maybe not live that kind of positive, engaged experience. So that's one view of history. But there are other historians, arguing that, this is a moment in time where there's a lot of repositioning, and we'll move beyond it. This authoritarian push on the one hand, and the economic disequilibrium on the other will ultimately be reshaped by different policies and different administrations moving forward. And their view is much more optimistic, that we needed to do this, we needed to go through this because it was a period of readjustment. Now, if you listen to the speech made by the Canadian Prime Minister in Davos the other night, it's an extraordinary speech about what he calls the middle powers. Canada is viewed as a middle power. But what he's basically saying to the large powers, to the United States in particular, is that there are some rules to the game, and we need to get back to the rules of how we coexist and operate in the world. And without those, chaos reigns, and more of this sort of push to the extremes continues. So maybe that direction will be emerging, but that's for us to hope for and maybe to work for.
Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful evening. Let me end on a positive note, because we knew there was going to be a lot of serious stuff to think about. Today was International Holocaust Memorial Day. I grew up in the greater Los Angeles area, and people always said then, never go into Orange County. That's a hotbed of anti-Semitism. I want you to know that today, the Orange County Board of Supervisors had a program in which representatives, a large number of representatives of the Jewish community, were present to acknowledge this day. That at city councils, multiple city councils throughout Orange County this week, the city councils are taking a moment of silence, a moment to acknowledge it. Anti-Semitism is real from the left and from the right, but I don't think that we should think they all hate us. They don't all hate us. I was today at the meeting of our Greater Huntington Beach Interfaith Council. Our own cantor Jenna Sagan is on the executive board. And there are good people in our community who really and truly care. We ought not despair. There are things to be concerned about. There's a lot of work to be done, but the future is not bleak, and we just need to stand up and take our place. Dr. Windmueller, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you so much for coming. We have a very nice little reception, so please make your way into the social hall and have a bite. Want to make sure Dr. Windmueller has time to get home. He's driving back to LA tonight, so want to make sure he has a chance. Phyllis, your question was so poignant to me, and I would never pretend to know anything about this topic, but I do know what my rabbi has taught me. And the way Jews fix things is we pray. And how do we pray? We pray with our feet by protesting and marching. We pray with our hands by repairing the world. We pray with our wallets by giving tzedakah. We pray with our voices by calling our representatives. We pray at the ballot box. You know, we pray in lots of ways. So I don't want that to sound trite, like what do we do about anti-Semitism? We pray, but we pray in active ways. Thank you. Good night, everybody.